that, I am going to let Kevin introduce our guest speaker today, Anita, because Kevin also is heavily involved with what Anita has done here in Bloomington. So thanks, Kevin.
So I'm lucky because I get to choose who the speakers are a little bit. So I took the opportunity to invite Anita Ruth. And I think it's timely because last week there was a nice article in the Star Tribune about Anita, but I thought we needed a more up-close and personal conversation with Anita. She's going to talk about stuff. I don't want to do too much in the introduction, but I will say that Anita first worked in Bloomington for the Bloomington Civic Theater in 1966. I was told that in no uncertain terms by some other members of our community. So, and Anita's been the music director, I guess, since 2005, give or take, of what is now Artistry, and has contributed to more than 70 productions in our history, which is pretty great. But she's done a lot more stuff than that, and I think she'll probably talk about that, but she's had a real impact on the theater community here in the Twin Cities, and it's an honor to have Anita here. Thank you.
Wow, I guess the idea is to say that you're leaving, and then they go, oh, okay. But first of all, I'd like to say that I am so honored today to have Debbie and Alan Schneider here. You know, they are the founders of the Feast at Artistry. And if I refer to it as BCT, that's because that's how I knew it for so long. But without them, none of us would have anything like the feast that we have had, because you gave us that beautiful theater. And so I just really like to say thank you. So, you know, I was thinking about coming here today, and I go, well, what would they want to know? You know, I just feel like, you know, there are much more prominent people that could come and talk to you. But on the other hand, not a lot of people know what music directors do. You know, it's not always obvious. So maybe I can point a few of those things out. I was born in Norfolk, Virginia, at the Naval Hospital, 3 days after the end of the war on August 9th. Both my parents were in the Navy. That's where they met. And my dad stayed in the Navy for one more year after that. But he had met my mother and visited her in Minnesota and thought that Minnesota was paradise, that's where they should go live. So that's how I got to Minnesota. I grew up in Crystal, knowing that Robbinsdale was the height of sophistication, and why couldn't we live there? But I went to Robbinsdale High School, and that was great because they have a wonderful music programs, and they do a lot of shows, big-time shows. So that's where I first got introduced to musical theater. And then I went to the university, but at that time, the music department at the university was really only interested in teachers, in teaching teachers. So I became a humanities major, which is like, what are you going to do with that, you know? But as many of you probably know, that it's the people that you meet at college, at the university, that will stay with you the whole rest of your life and be very important to you. And that's where I met a fellow named John Command, who the Schneiders know. The very first thing, and we formed a music review group called the First Nighters. I don't know if any of you in this room remember Chic Sextet and the Edgewater Eight, and there were a lot of clubs around, dinner clubs around town that would have 6 or 8 singers and like a trio behind them, and they would put on generally themed shows like the French show or the 60s show, or, well, it was the 60s, so maybe it was the 50s show. You know, and so the First Nighters were a group that we didn't have a club to be in, but we did a lot of places. We did a lot of stuff at Diamond Jim's, which is down in southern part of St. Paul. And then there was a Diamond Lil's or is it the other way around? I don't know. In downtown Minneapolis. And we would do things there. But we rehearsed every single night and on the weekends, and thought it was the greatest thing in the world. So, but the friendships formed there have followed me through my whole life. John and several of the other people in the First Nighters group were also very active at Bloomington Civic Theater. And that's how I first got introduced to Bloomington. In 1966, I'm glad you knew that date because it's hard to remember all this. There wasn't the plethora of theaters that are all over the Twin Cities area now. I mean, this is just amazing how many outlets for theatrical presentations that there are in the Twin Cities. Back then, the Guthrie had just begun. The University of Minnesota was quite a player in that. A lot of people went to see their shows. But Bloomington was one of the very first, I'm going to use the word community because it was of the community. And sometimes community is thought to be kind of a pejorative term that, it's just community theater. But I think that Bloomington was community theater in the best sense because lots of kids growing up, adults who maybe had decided that they were not going to try to make theater their vocation, it was their avocation, and they all joined together and made really great theater. I believe that Bloomington was started in 1955 by a group of people sitting around a kitchen table going, we should have a theater. And they kept going. It had no home it really had no home until the Schneiders came along and said, well, you can be here. And we did shows in the high schools and junior highs of Bloomington in their auditoriums. And I like to think that the quality was high and that, a lot of people enjoyed that. So that was 1966. Then in 1968, a big development in the theater world was the Chanhassen Dinner Theater. And the theater world was abuzz. Well, is this really going to happen? Where is it going to be? Who's going to run it and who's going to get to be there? And there was a lot of talk. Fortunately, the man who was chosen to be the artistic director was Gary Gisselman, also a Bloomington native. His background was that his grandparents had a strawberry farm in Bloomington, not too far from where the theater is, just kind of across Old Shakopee Road. They had a strawberry farm, and all the kids worked on it. And so Gary grew up in Bloomington, and he was kind of a young stud in the theater at the time, and he was directing some of the BCT shows, some of the Bloomington shows, and so we all were going, oh, you got to take me with you, and he did, which was really nice. Chanhassen opened in 1968, and it was for most of the time up until that a big hole in the ground. I don't know, most of you have been to Chan, right? Yes? Yeah. So that whole complex, up to about a mile, I mean, it was, we would drive out there just to see it. And Herb Bloomberg, the man who owns it and who built it, he built it because he thought that Don Stoltz had such a great thing in his old log theater, and Herb wanted to have a place of his own. And I think that he really considered that to be like his living room. You know, when you walk in there, you got the fireplace and all of that, and he really, thank God he did it. I mean, it's just sort of unusual that a man like Herb Bloomberg would build a theater, but he did. And so that was fabulous. And lots of us from Bloomington Civic Theater went out there. It was also all of a sudden not a community theater anymore, in the sense that people were paid money. You get money to do this. Okay. And people were hired from New York and Chicago, and there was the Actors Union, which is called Actors Equity. They came in, and so pretty soon everybody that worked at Chanhassen, the actors that worked at Chanhassen, were union actors, and so people were getting paid pretty well, you know, and that was good. And the musicians union was also, we were all part of that already, but this was, you know, truly professional theater. When that theater first opened, they would do 2 weeks of a non-musical and 3 weeks of a musical, which, you know, that doesn't make any sense. You cannot possibly sustain that. So, as many of you probably know, there are shows now that run at Chanhassen for years, like Footloose, for instance, you know, is still going until February. But we would do shows. We did My Fair Lady for a year, 8 times a week for a year. My Fair Lady and A Sound of Music was another one. And Fiddler. Fiddler we did 3 different times for almost a year each time. And if anybody even thinks about Sunrise Sunset, you can leave the room. So that was, and I stayed there for 20 years, because it was a great job. You know, the salary was very nice. You got to work with your friends and do a lot of great shows. Live in Minneapolis, where you could have your own house, you could have a yard, you could have a dog, you know, you could have a normal life and still have it be an artistic life. You know, after about 7 months of Sound of Music, that was enough of that, but, you know, you pay your dues with that. And so the thought of going to New York or something like that, of course, passes one's mind. But on the other hand, you say, well, I've got all of this here. Why would I give that up? You know, as exciting as New York might be. So I stayed. And the job of music director at Chanhassen was, or anywhere really, the first job is casting. You know, you have auditions, and people, auditions are horrible. I mean, because people come and they put themselves out in front of you and say, do you like me? And, you know, it's hard. It's not as hard for me as it is for them, but people come and they sing their songs and they do their monologues, and we would audition like 100 people in a day. It was everybody wants to be in show business, and there's only so many roles, and the parts too, you know, it depends on what part it is as to who, you know, who gets cast. But, so you have the auditions, and then you have the big meeting where you put all the headshots down on the floor, and everybody says, well, we're going to choose this person or this person or this person. So, and you get it cast. When rehearsals start, my job was to teach everybody the music the notes on the page. And at that time, there was no internet. There wasn't really, there were no CDs, it was still LPs. So any cast album that came out of the show, lots of it would be left off. They'd have the main songs and that sort of thing, but they wouldn't have every single note that anybody sang in that show, because now they do have CDs and streaming with every single note ever thought about for that show, and everybody that wants to be in that show goes and learns it that way. So I always say, we are not doing a production of the CD. We're going to make, but it gets in their heads, and it's, while it's fine, it's somebody else's rendition of that song. So that's been a big, huge change. But anyway, back in the early days of Chan, we would teach them music, teach all the different parts for the choir, or for the ensemble singing. And then the rehearsals would start where people were, the director, in this case, Mr. Gisselman mostly, would block the show. So the piano player, me, sits there while he's telling everybody what to do. And what I was doing was reducing the orchestration, because all of the shows that we got to do, which were fabulous, would come with orchestrations for like 24 pieces. You remember Oklahoma and Carousel and all the great 60s, 50s, and 60s shows that we all just love, but they would come with these huge orchestrations, and we had 10 people maybe in the band, or 12. So I started taking the entire orchestration and putting it out all around me and going, well, if I only have these 10 instruments, what are they going to play? So I would take that and reduce it down, which was a ridiculous amount of work, and no computers yet either. It was all by hand, but it was also an amazing workshop in learning what all of these other orchestrators, these great, wonderful people, how they did it. So it was a good trade-off. I learned a lot from that. And then, so we would rehearse the choreography that you have to play for the dance rehearsals. And then you finally get to the show. And at Chanhassen, I played the piano and conducted. So sort of two-purpose thing there. But the musicians around me got used to that. And we had a really great band there. Just interesting that in this, my last formal show for a while, many of my musicians from Chanhassen said they wanted to come back and play in the band of Shrek, which is really terrific. So it's the great thing about theater is that you form these families that are, they float. I mean, you're a really tight family while the show is going on, and then people go off and do another show, but then they come back, and it's just like they never left. And going through 50 years of this, I have found that at any time, if you need anything, if there's a death in the family, or any kind of thing that you might need help, actors, musicians, they're right there. It's just, I just feel so blessed this whole time to have been a part of these kinds of organizations that, they seem ephemeral, but it's really a great thing to have. So, and then I would conduct the show for maybe a year, 8 times a week. But it was, it was great. It was really great. And Chanhassen has an excellent reputation. Again, a lot of people kind of go, dinner theater, but it really is a great organization. And at that time, they were doing non-musical shows, in what it's called the Fireside, and doing a lot of new national shows. And Gary was a great artistic director. And after about 12 years, he left and went to Arizona. So that meant that all of us, whenever he would do a musical, we got to go to Arizona too. So that was really fun. That was nice. And so finally, after 20 years, I thought, that's enough of this now. That kind of the burnout phase of 3 years of Fiddler. So I said I was going to move on. And of course I thought I'd never work again. This is it. I'll have to go work at McDonald's and, flip hamburgers and stuff like that. Well, that didn't happen, which was nice. Then there was a huge brand new world out there. It was like a place, the first place that I went was called Ruby's Cabaret, which was downtown Minneapolis. Now I think it's a cowboy bar now, but it was a wonderful place. A woman named Mary Lear, who had worked for Joe Papp in New York, opened this, and Myron Johnson had started his Ballet of the Dolls there. So it was very arty, and we would do all kinds of strange shows like that we made up. We made up everything. And there was a song called Sing Me No Love Songs, which of course was nothing but love songs. But it was wonderful. It was just very seat of your pants kind of thing, and it was great. That same time, Gary was producing shows for Minnesota Orchestra, the summer series, these cabaret shows where they would put wood over all of the seats on the main floor of Orchestra Hall and put tables out, and people would come, and we would do a Rodgers and Hammerstein show, or a Lerner and Lowe, or a Cole Porter, and that was fabulous. I mean, playing with the Minnesota Orchestra, thank you very much. And that was a time when my trombone player gave me the best advice that I ever had. He said, "Don't play the first note, and don't play the last note." Because if I had played the first note, I would have been so far ahead of the rest of the orchestra. When the conductor in an orchestra in a classical orchestra gives a downbeat, that's about the time the violins pick up their instrument. I mean, truly, that's a slight exaggeration, but that was, again, a wonderful, wonderful learning experience for me. We did that for about 10 years, which is really great. And then I got to also, I did a lot of work at the Children's Theater. I actually even got to write the music for our show there. Children's Theater is a fabulous place. You take a picture book, and everybody looks at the book, and the set designer goes away, and the costume designer goes away, and the composer goes away, and several months later they come back, and this whole big picture book just opens on stage. It's magical. It's really magical. At Children's Theater, I did some other shows at the Guthrie. I got to be, or at the Guthrie, I got to do a couple of Shakespeare's with Joe Dowling, which was very, very exciting. The man that I worked with at the Children's Theater and the Guthrie, Mel Marvin, also was associated with an opera company in Amsterdam, so I got to go across the water for a while and write orchestrations. That's another thing. All that reorchestrating, I had kind of figured out how to do it. So I got to go to Amsterdam and places in Europe with him and write some orchestrations. And let's see. Then one of the most important things was that I started to work with a group called Project Success. And I don't know if you've heard of them, but it was started by the daughter of a dear friend of mine, Adrian Dirks. And their idea was every child should have a chance, and every child should be met where they are. And they have facilitators that go into the schools. And one of the things they do is take kids to shows. Because originally it was done with a woman from the Guthrie's education department. So they would go into the school and talk about Shakespeare and tell the stories and that sort of thing. And then they would take the kids on a bus and go to the Guthrie, which was an amazing thing. After a few years of that, they decided they wanted to do their own shows. So they hired myself and a director and a choreographer, and we would meet with 60 to 70 6th, 7th, and 8th graders every day for 8 weeks, and then we'd put on a show. And they were Broadway shows. I mean, they were Broadway shows. We would make our own. Now you can get junior everything. I mean, they got junior Kinky Boots, so, you know. But we would make our own juniors of these shows and have 70 kids on stage. And it wasn't always the most the most exciting thing to do, but now that I did that for 15 years, and now in our show, in Shrek, we have 2 of the kids that were Project Success kids. If you come to see them, the person that is playing Peter Pan is one of our Project Success kids, immensely talented. And our teen Fiona is another one. John Jameson, who you might have seen around and done lots and lots of shows, he's a Project Success kid. So we take these kids from these schools, some of them homeless, some of them from schools, even if they had parents, you know, that never would have thought about this opportunity to find themselves. Maybe they weren't great athletes, you know, maybe they didn't distinguish themselves academically, but they shone in the theater, and they found their spot, and they come back later and tell you that, and that was really, really amazing. So I did that, and then John Command came to me one day. John Command from the First Nighters, remember, way back there. When everybody left to go to Chanhassen, the Bloomington Civic Theater really faded. It didn't disappear, but it faded. And after about maybe 10 years of that, John Command went back to Bloomington and started directing shows for them. And the quality just got better and better and better. And after I left Chanhassen, he said, "You should come and work here." And I'm going, that's community theater. I don't want to do that. So he kept after me. And then one day he came in and he said, "We're going to do Follies. Where do I sign?" You know, that was the word, Follies. So that was my first show back in 2005, I guess. And John and I did a lot of shows together. He was great. Eventually, he left the theater, and other directors came in, and it's been an amazing experience because I don't have to reduce the scores anymore. We have every instrument that the original orchestration calls for, which is such a plus and such a lure. People want to come and play that. It's just amazing, and it has been a huge, great gift to me. You know, kind of supplemented by Social Security, but it's really been amazing at that point in my career to have Bloomington Civic Theater, to have what's become Artistry, to have a place that the Schneiders gave to the community. And now I'm just going to wrap this up by saying theater is changing rapidly. After COVID, there's been, you know, that was a huge interrupter, but at the same time as COVID, there is now a really extensive push, probably having a lot to do with the murder of George Floyd and all of the movements that came out of that, but the movement for inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And all of the theaters in town are really putting this front and center as to their mission as to what they really want to accomplish. And Kevin had the great good insight to hire a woman about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, whose mission is, her name is Kelly Foster Warder. She was 14 years old at Ruby's, tap dancing her little heart out when she was there, but she is an advocate, a fierce advocate of what she calls idea, and all the theaters are really, I think, trying their hardest to achieve more of this inclusion. And what I wanted to say at the end to all of you Rotarians, I know you do fabulous, wonderful work. I believe that that inclusion and diversity is not really going to happen until we get it in education. Until we can get, I mean, it was great that Project Success and what we did, but for underserved communities to have the opportunity to take lessons, have instruments, see, even know that this is something to do, that anything that a group like you can do to promote that in the schools or in the rec centers, or provide access to even thinking about that a person might want to be on stage or might have lessons and that sort of thing, I think would be one of the greatest things that you could do for the Bloomington community. Because there's a lot of kids here who might want to, but not have the opportunities or the way to get there. So that's just my little speech there. But I want to thank you all for listening to me all this time. But are there any questions about?
We have a few minutes for anybody to ask questions or make a comment.
No?
Well, I'll go.
Yes.
I want to thank you for your statement about equity and inclusion. I think about as having the opportunity to serve on the council, and we have that beautiful Snyder Theater right across the way from the civic area. There's oftentimes I think about that dialogue that goes on between art and civic responsibility, and so I just think that was just a proper place to have that. And I just think about it. Many folks in this room may not know my connection to theater. I remember when I was at Kennedy High School, I had the opportunity to play Javert and a number of other characters, but jumping off into the orchestra pit and Javert as he commits a suicide, that was a lot of fun.
You must have been pretty good if you were playing Javert.
Well, I think my brother was involved in theater, and so I kind of took after him, and he was much better than I was, but I enjoy theater. I suppose I'm a city council member, so some folks would say that would be good.
Yeah, well.
So, again, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you would say just a little bit more about the importance of arts as we kind of move forward into the future.
Yeah, but the importance of art, yes. I think I think we all know that, but it can't be overstressed. I don't think that there's so many kids out there that seeing. I also go into the schools with a group from Vocal Essence, and Vocal Essence is Phil Brunel's choir thing, and in February, Black History Month, he always does what he calls a witness concert, and so there are 8 of us. I'm the token white person on that roster, and very happy to be so. But we go into all the schools to tell them about the witness concert, and you see kids that are just, they need something. They need to be able to have something important in their lives. And I think, especially, there are so many kids, they put kids in school that don't even speak English. The Karn kids, they don't even know what a book is. We're way off the topic now, but in their country they didn't have a written language. They don't have books. They've never worn shoes before, and it's 20 below out there, and they're in the 4th grade because they're 12 or something, but they don't speak English. And to me, that is just ridiculous. But when Michael and I would come in, and music was one way to engage them, you know, and to make them feel like, well, here's something that I kind of know about. But education, 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 education.
Terry, I think you'll get the last question.
Okay. I have to confess I'm not very literate when it comes to art. But I was talked my wife into going to Artistry to see the play Memphis musical. And I thought it was very enjoyable. It was entertaining and just edgy enough to keep my interest. And I'm wondering, how do you guys decide between all the various opportunities you might have, that which ones you'll pick? Because I assume you have to make money.
So, I'm sorry, Memphis?
Memphis, yeah.
Memphis, and how did they decide to do that?
Yeah, like how you pick one versus the other one?
Well, that was Kelly, and because that was a fulfillment of her mission, because that was a show about, this is a long conversation, but well, you know, it's so complicated. But it was a show that presented opportunity for a lot of people of color to be in, and she felt that was really important. And the story that it told, she felt was important too. And because she also works with Latte Da. Latte Da was doing Jelly's Last Jam, which is a show that's entirely cast with black actors. 10,000 Things was doing Thunder Knocking at My Door, which is another show entirely cast with black actors. And there's another one, but it seemed like of the shows that were all going on at the same time, that Artistry was probably best able to do a show like Memphis because it's bigger, you know, and to be able to employ enough black actors to do that show. This is another thing that's coming up, is what shows are we going to do? I mean, you know, people say, well, you can't do Carousel anymore because he hits her. Or you can't do My Fair Lady because he throws a slipper at her, or because it denigrates women. You know, I mean, all of those shows that we have loved for so long, there is something along the way that people are going to say, no, you can't do that. Who's writing the new shows? If you say we can't do those old ones, we have to get people to write new shows and not be jukebox musicals, but actually have a story to tell, and to tell it from a different perspective. That's the big thing. So I don't think I answered your question, but it's that to me is the whole thing that theater is about now. Who is going to write the new stories? And supporting that also. I'll be quiet.
I think most of us could listen to Anita for another 2 hours and have her tell stories. But thank you so much for being here, and thanks to the Schneiders for also being here and contributing to the story of Anita's journey. This year, our Rotary International theme is Imagine Rotary. And I think Anita just encompassed what we think about when we think about imagination. And so hopefully all of you as Rotarians go out this week and imagine what you also can do. Thank you.